All right. I think we can get started. I'm sure Commissioner Ortega is coming, but maybe we'll just start with introductions, and by the time we get through, he will be on joining us. So we have lots of guests on today, and so I think we should just take a minute to introduce ourselves. I'll start. I am Commissioner Modest Castillo. I represent Ramsey County District 3 and chairing the workshop today. And then I will move to Commissioner Reinhardt.
Hi, I'm Commissioner Victoria Reinhardt, and I represent District 7. And I will turn it to Commissioner Fretham.
I'm Commissioner Fretham, and I represent District 1. I'll go ahead and toss it to Commissioner McDonough.
Thank you. Jim McDonough, represent District 6, east side of St. Paul, and I'll turn it over to Mary Jo McGuire.
Maybe she's on mute.
I think so.
Did you just call me?
Yes.
Yeah, say your name.
Mary Jo McGuire.
All right.
District 2, County Commissioner, District 2. Sorry.
Thank you. And then Commissioner Carter.
Tony Carter, County Commissioner, District 4, and Chair of the Board. I don't think I heard Commissioner Ortega get introduced.
No, I don't think he's on yet. So we're kind of stalling just a little bit, hoping he's going to hop on. So in the meantime, we'll go over to our staff. Lydia, I'll let you start.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lydia. I'm in the County Manager's office. Thank you.
And Ryan?
Sure. Thanks, Commissioner. Hi, Ryan O'Connor, Ramsey County Manager. And I could just go right to Elizabeth and then say, maybe Elizabeth, take us around the horn for everybody else that's with us today.
Perfect.
Great. Elizabeth Tolzman, Policy Director. And I'm sorry, did you want me to call on folks or just introduce folks that are here?
Yeah, just go ahead and introduce folks.
Okay, so other staff, we have Sarah Holly, our Racial and Health Equity Administrator. We also have Kim Close from Health and Wellness. I see that Kathy Adine, Deputy County Manager, who's also been a good sponsor of this work. Gina Postolka from Health and Wellness as well. Sorry, I'm just going through the roles here. Have I missed any other staff? I think that covers all of our staff. Oh, I should introduce Edmundo Lijo from the City of St. Paul. And then our speakers today will also, we have Courtney Lee, who's calling in from New York from the VAER Institute. So she's on East Coast time. And then we have several representatives from our legal service providers. I see Michelle Garnett McKinsey, Robin Phillips, Vina is also on. Liz Kenny from VERA is also on as well. Evangeline from ILCM, who's our St. Thomas Fellow. And, oh, Robin, see you on there as well. I think that covers everybody. Did I miss anybody? Oh, Ann Carlson.
Thanks. Anyone get missed? Introduce themselves. Well, we're missing Commissioner Ortega. I'm sure he'll join us shortly as well. And I'll just get started. As you probably remember, or just to refresh your memories, in 2019, the Ramsey County Board moved $100,000 for immigration legal defense in partnership with the VERA Institute and the City of St. Paul. And we pulled money together to put a budget of $250,000 into the pot to represent low-income detained individuals who are detained for immigration proceedings or potential removal. And so it was a very specific pool that we'll hear about people who have been served, how the work has gone, what the updates are, and maybe even get an insight on where we are in that funding as well. I know that's not the focus of today, but I think it's indicative of our values and how we invest. And so I just want to put that out on the table too. And so we also put in $100,000 in wraparound services for families whose family member might be in this situation, because we know that when a family member is detained or removed from the household, it impacts everyone. And so we're also doing wraparound services. And currently that has been mostly focused on outreach and connections to other services as well as legal clinics. So a lot of times someone might get detained and a family is like, we don't even know what to do or where to start, or do we have representation? And so getting all that information as well. So we're going to hear all about that. We're going to try to get through slides. We do have a couple built-in spots for questions. So we'll do a few presentations and then we'll pause for questions, because it's a lot of information. We're going to do a very high level. And as you know, immigration issues are very complicated, and they're complicated for people who do this work every day. And so we might have a lot of questions, but a lot will be answered on the slides. We'll try to answer as many, and then we'll also come back later if we have questions that don't get answered here today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth Tolzman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and that was a really great intro. So if we could go ahead and start the PowerPoint, and we'll just go over the agenda for the day.
Are you able to see it?
Yep, we can see it. It's still, it's not in presentation mode.
Oh, it's in presentation mode on my end. You're not able to see it as presentation mode?
No.
No, it's just sharing the whole screen.
Let's see.
I think it's going now.
Is it going now?
Well, it's not in presentation mode, but we can at least see the next slide. So this works for now.
Sorry.
No worries. Why don't we go to slide 2, Lydia?
Okay. Give me a second. I'm gonna see if I can share it on my laptop. I'm sorry.
No worries. So, but I could go ahead and get started here. So our agenda today is just to give you a brief overview and background. Madam Chair did a great job of explaining the history. I do want to highlight and iterate some key timelines on that. And I want to also acknowledge Commissioner Jim McDonough. He was a board chair at the time in 2018, and he has been a huge leader in the space. I remember us walking around to foundations and community to engage our community on this topic. As Commissioner Mata Castillo mentioned, immigration is very complicated and complex. Everything is in a case-by-case basis, but with Ramsey County having a large immigrant population, with half of them being non-citizens, we knew that this was critical for our 4 goals of well-being, opportunity, prosperity, and accountability. I would note that in August 18 is when the board approved the $100,000 in wraparound services. This is particularly important because of our strategic priority around community engagement. We engaged community on what they wanted to see in terms of wraparound, and you'll hear from Sarah and Lydia later on about how our grant awards reflected our feedback and what we heard from community. In terms of legal defense fund, that was approved in November of 2018. And I would note there that I would say 2019 was the first full year where we implemented both the wraparound and legal defense funds. Obviously, we got disrupted this year with the pandemic and a few other things, but we still held strong and maintained our grants and services, and you'll get an update there. And then you also hear from Edmundo from the city of St. Paul. They have been an integral partner in this work, not only in their contributions towards the Immigration Legal Defense Fund, but we're working very closely with Lydia and I on strategies and impacts to the community. And then I will end with some key policy updates. There has been a lot in the space. I know our board heard a lot about census this morning and all the policy updates with our current administration. I think immigration has been a whirlwind this past year. And so we want to highlight the leadership and the courageousness that our board leaders have taken in that space.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing for just a second to see if I can do it on my laptop. Okay. Are you able to see that? Let's see.
Yes. Yep, it worked.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yep.
So we could go to slide 3. These are our key presenters today. And I do appreciate the accommodation for all of our guests. It really represents the strength of the team and the leaders who have worked in this space. Next slide, please. Here's the Immigration Wraparound Services team. You'll hear from Lydia and Sarah today. And obviously Kim, Gina, you guys are noted that they're present. And also want to acknowledge Deputy County Manager Kathy Adine, who's been a huge leader and supporter of this work and this team as well. Next slide, please. And with that, I'm just going to hand it over to Courtney Lee from the Bear Institute.
Hi, you all. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, Madam Chair and commissioners and staff. Thank you so much for inviting me to today's workshop. It's been about a year now since I last met Commissioner McDonough and Commissioner Carter, and it's been great to work with Commissioner Carter on the recent SAFE initiative convening, where she spoke at one of our webinars, really advancing racial justice in these movements. So it's been a pleasure and also a series of challenges to work together, but it is really inspiring to see everybody here. So I've been asked to come today to speak to the questions around what is universal representation, why does it matter, what is the SAFE initiative, and why is it important to continue to do this work? So I can start from a pretty basic place that most people, in the United States, they know that if you get arrested and the state is trying to take away your freedom, you get a public defender that's paid for by the government. But it's less widely known that there is no right to a government-funded attorney if the government seeks to deport you, right? And this is important because immigration law is incredibly complex. It's often stacked against you, and the stakes are very, very high in deportation proceedings, even though these are considered civil, not criminal matters. One judge likened these court hearings to death penalty cases in a traffic court setting. It's really horrifying to see what we're seeing on the ground. And because private attorneys can cost tens of thousands of dollars, which is unrealistic for most people to afford, it means that 70% of all detained people in the country go alone before an immigration judge, as well as a government who is always represented by an attorney. So universal representation advances a public defender model in deportation proceedings. And it says that you get an attorney at your side to support you in your legal claim, regardless of your income, your country of origin, or any sort of contact with the criminal legal system. And this is really based on the premise that everyone deserves a fair day in court, right? We believe that ultimately a judge gets to decide the outcome of the individual case-by-case decisions, but you don't even get a fair chance unless you have an attorney at your side in the first place. So we know that representation makes a huge difference in people's lives and has radiating impacts into the community. And so one thing that we know is that someone who's represented by an attorney in their removal proceedings is 3.5 times more likely to be released from detention during the course of their case. And they're 10 times more likely to establish a right to remain in the United States. This means that someone who has a valid claim isn't deported just because they don't have an attorney. That's a lot of people. And so the SAFE initiative and network, which I'll explain more in the next slide, has represented about 1,000 people now. And of those whose cases started out in ICE detention, I'll just point to some of the infographics in the slide. We have the statistic here that says that 43% of those were released from custody on bond or at the conclusion of their case. And 71% of those clients who were granted a bond had their bond amount lowered or had one sent where one originally was not set. And that's a huge, huge impact because it means that, when people are released from ICE detention, it means they're able to go back to their families and, run their businesses, take their kids to school, pay their taxes, contribute to society, all while, being able to participate in gathering evidence to support their case. And this last statistic here, which is a really important one, says that 98% of clients who were released from custody have continued to appear for their court hearings. This demonstrates the needlessness of civil detention, right? And also supports the argument that providing legal services to someone who is in deportation proceedings, that is a valid alternative to detention. So Lydia, could you please pass to the next slide? Thank you. So what is the SAFE initiative? SAFE started in 2017, and we are a network of government, legal services providers, and community-based organizations that are all working together towards universal representation at the city, county, and state levels. The overarching goal of SAFE is to build an evidentiary base at the local level across the country in order to catalyze change at the federal level. And so prior to 2017, there were 2 places in the country that funded removal defense programs that you can see on the first map. And the second map is of the SAFE network. Ramsey County and St. Paul joined as a formal partner in 2019, as you previously mentioned, and joins 19 other jurisdictions across 11 states who fund removal defense programs. We, of course, work closely with the county staff and the legal services providers, and we recently started a formal partnership with the grassroots organization Release Minnesota 8 to help advance the movement in your region specifically. And they have an exciting and powerful media project in the works. But the third map shows us that beyond the formal SAFE network partners that we have, there are over 40 communities in 18 states that fund deportation defense programs. So for the next slide, Lydia, this shows that there's widespread support, widespread and bipartisan support for these types of programs. So Vera has been conducting public polling with a survey firm called Lucid, which found that in the Twin Cities metropolitan area, 3 out of 5 people, or 61% of people, support government-funded attorneys for immigrants facing deportation. And those numbers are even higher when separated by county, as you can see on this slide. These statistics are also consistent with the numbers on a national level. I believe that you have the full findings of this report in your supplementary materials, and the national report is also available on Vera's website. So I believe I'll pass it to the next speaker. Elizabeth, this might be you.
Thanks. So that was thank you, Courtney. That was a great backdrop and data on our immigration legal defense. And now we'll shift to our wraparound services where, I'm sorry, this is still on our legal defense part. So just to note that as Courtney mentioned, those who are part of the SAFE network are legal service providers, advocates, and governments. And then our board allocates $100,000 per year for our wraparound services. Then also this year, we entered in a partnership with the University of St. Thomas School of Law through our public sector pathways, as well as our funding, to host a legal fellow at ILCM, the Immigrant Law Center. And you'll hear some more from ILCM, but that's been a great partnership for us to have our residents refer legal advice and trainings and support as it relates to immigration, where people may not have direct representation on certain issues. Next slide, please. So this is the breakdown of how the Legal Defense Fund was created. Ramsey County contributed $100,000, Vera matched $100,000, and St. Paul contributed $50,000. And so a total of that is $250,000. And I'll hand it over back to Courtney to talk about the contracting part of it as well.
Right, and this is kind of the boring part, but the length of our contract with the legal services providers spans from March 1st, 2020 to February 28th, 2021. So we got this contracting and the program off of the ground in the middle of a pandemic, which is no easy feat. So I'll just say that in providing some more background for the information you'll receive from Robin later. But Vera helped to manage the contracting and the evaluation process. We conducted the request for proposals and helped select the legal services providers, which, as you know, are the 3 different providers: advocates, ILCM, and Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid. And I'll add an edit to the last bullet point too. I know that the funding is important here. So just by way of background, Vera, when we administer funds on behalf of local governments, we tend to distribute grants in 2 different payments, one at the outset of the program, the contract term, and another second payment in the middle of the contract term, about 6 months in. So we we previously spent half of the fund dollars at the start of the contract term, and the second payment I just confirmed has been distributed and dispersed. So the legal defense fund has been fully funded at this point.
So here's another visual of our defense partners, and it gives you kind of a good understanding of their roles and responsibilities, as well as our collaborative work as well. Next slide, please. Here are the representatives. Obviously, we have Robin here from ILCM, and I saw that Vina and Evangeline is on too. From Advocates for Human Rights, I know that I saw Michelle on here representing advocates, and then we have Anne from Midwest Legal Aid as well.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, Madam Chair, Commissioners. I want to start by thanking you for the opportunity to speak with you today about the Ramsey County Immigration Legal Defense Fund. As was mentioned, my name is Robin Meyer-Thompson, and I'm a supervising staff attorney at the Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota and work in partnership with the Advocates for Human Rights and Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid in providing legal representation under this project. I would like to start by describing the scope of representation as you have on this slide and providing you with some updates about the program as it's progressing so far. So as was mentioned, the project started March 1st of 2020, and right away we needed to make some adjustments to the representation due to the COVID-19 situation. So due to the COVID situation, we were not allowed into the detention centers to meet with our clients. So we worked with the detention facilities and set up remote options to be able to identify cases and also to work to provide full representation for our clients. These included phone and video primarily. Over the summer, noted a temporary decrease in Ramsey County and St. Paul residents that were in active court proceedings at Fort Snelling. However, we did note an increase in individuals who are in long-term detention, and this was due to their cases being on appeals or having other types of case types from Ramsey County. We worked with the partners here and responded to those needs by expanding our representation to include additional case types, which included requests to be released on parole, habeas corpus petitions also requesting release from long-term detention, motions to reopen, and appeals for individuals where we had not encountered them previously. So individuals maybe whose appeals were pending by the time we started the contract. However, as I mentioned, we saw that temporary decrease over the summer. In the weeks leading up to the election, we have seen a new surge in arrests against immigrants across Minnesota, including Ramsey County residents. Yesterday, we also identified 2 new cases and are reaching out to set up client screenings with those individuals. While we have seen some difficulties and challenges, I'm also really pleased to share that we've had some very positive case outcomes. So based on the kind of a high level view, we've accepted at this point 13 cases for full representation. The 2 other cases I also mentioned are in evaluation, and 85% of the cases we've accepted have been for St. Paul residents. In addition, we're providing this representation under what's called a universal representation model. And Courtney may be able to explain that more if there are questions, but essentially what this means is that we offer representation to any Ramsey County client who is income eligible regardless of the case type. This is really tremendous service to clients, and it's a model that is inclusive and really ensures great outcomes for individuals who otherwise would be facing it alone, as Courtney mentioned. With our universal representation, we offer high quality legal assistance, gathering evidence, researching country conditions, preparing witnesses and testimony, and just gathering everything the client might need for whatever type of legal defense that they have. We go into the case not knowing what their options might be. We identify any possible defense for them and then pursue it. So universal representation means that all clients are eligible under the grant, they're allowed to be given someone in their corner to help them navigate what is a very complex web of immigration laws that is ever changing. And what we also appreciate that the county is aware of is that working on these legal cases is about so much more than the legal representation. Many of our clients came to the United States as refugees, fleeing dangerous home countries and environments. And the traumas that they have survived may have led to mental health conditions and other needs for treatment, for social work assistance, and wraparound services. So one of the other investments that the county has made in holistic services has meant that our clients have been able to be connected with essential medical health, mental health, social work, housing, and other referrals. And as I mentioned, due to the COVID-19 situation, we've evolved. We've been doing some, remote screenings with psychologists and evaluators, and really have adapted under the circumstances. And Courtney, I'm not sure if you want to provide a little bit of context on the national level as well here.
Yeah, of course, Robin. Thanks so much for that information. Just wanting to affirm, the work that you all are doing, even in the client stories that you've shared with us. It's clear that your clients really benefit from your zealous representation and the care that they receive under this program that is a very holistic one. You see how many people are on this call right now even. And so I just wanted to provide a little bit of national context that in light of COVID, the things that Robin described are actually happening on a nationwide level. It's impacted lawyers' ability to meet with their clients, posed several administration issues in immigration court. I recently heard of a merits hearing, a final hearing that was conducted over a 5-6-way phone call. Really horrible challenges to due process, and families unable to see their loved ones. This is also happening in the context where ICE has continued to oppose humanitarian release. They've continued and resumed their regular operations of enforcement around the country. And so what we're seeing here is that it is nearly impossible to be released if you are arrested by ICE at the start of your case without the help of a legal team. So what, we are seeing these, safe attorneys across the country are getting people out of jail using creative ways through, things like habeas petitions that Robin mentioned to get people out of these very dangerous conditions. We're seeing communities like Release Minnesota 8 rally around individuals, create petitions, advocate for people's budgets. And we're seeing local governments like yourselves, commissioners, and even Mayor Carter in St. Paul speak out against egregious ICE practices, speak directly to those officers, shift budgets, renewing universal representation funding, and many people increasing the funding because they recognize that the need in this moment is so urgent. So thank you so much for your work.
Thank you, Courtney, for that national context as well. I also have the privilege of sharing some of the tremendous case outcomes and work that our legal team has been working on. And what I have here is a summary of the data of the outcomes for our accepted cases. And what I can tell you is the overall numbers here. I can share with you that we have won 4 cases before the immigration court for humanitarian protections, be they asylum or protection under what's called the Convention Against Torture. I can share that we have 4 pending applications for release that were filed with the Minnesota District Court for release under habeas corpus petitions. I can share that while we've lost 4 cases for relief locally, 1 is on appeal and we're fighting it, and 1 has a path to return to the United States because of the work of one of our attorneys for what's called a U visa petition, or a petition based on being the victim of a crime actually in the St. Paul area. And while I can share all of these case outcomes, I can also share that 62% of our accepted cases have been from Southeast Asian immigrants, including 5 Karen individuals, 2 Hmong individuals. That we've represented. 4 of our cases have been from individuals from the Latinx community and 2 others from African countries. And while I can share all of that, what I find to be most impactful and meaningful about the work comes from the clients themselves. You have a summary here of the amazing work in the materials that have been put together, including 3 very compelling client stories, but allow me to add 1 more. We have a client who is a Karen individual who grew up in a Thai refugee camp. He came to the United States at age 13. He's lived in the US now for 12 years and has had his green card for 10 years. His family, which includes his mother, stepfather, and 3 brothers, all live in Minnesota. And at age 25, he is in ICE custody now. And the basis of being in ICE custody is due to some criminal arrests that happened when he was a young adult. that are related to poverty and homelessness. He was feeling very alone, isolated, and in desperate need of community resources, including mental health, housing, and other services. We accepted the case, and one of our attorneys filed an application for protection under the Convention Against Torture. The attorney gathered hundreds of pages of country conditions evidence. It was a kind of an ethnic group that the court was not familiar with, and a country that the court isn't as acquainted with. So a lot of the articles were with the purpose of educating the court and the government attorney about the current conditions that the client would face as an ethnic minority if he were to return to Burma. Our attorney also was able to connect him virtually with what was the first culturally competent and language competent mental health provider he has ever seen. He was very pleased with that ability that he's not had previously. Ultimately, the judge did grant his application for relief, which was tremendous. But unfortunately, the government is appealing his case, and he remains in detention now, though the judge has granted his case while he's waiting for the appeal. What I will share and what I am most proud of about this case, though, is what the client said to our attorney. At the trial, he told her, "Before I was not happy. I did not have warmth and happiness in my life." He also shared with her that she was one of the first people who has ever made him feel understood and seen. This project is about keeping families together. It's about defending the right to counsel, but more important than that, it's about treating members of our community with dignity and the respect that they deserve. And on their behalf, I just want to truly thank you for that investment. Another takeaway from this, and one of the challenges that we're seeing, is just the length of time that these cases are pending. And what you can see from the case outcomes is, though we have won 4 cases, none of our clients have been released from detention yet at this point. And that is due to the fact that the government has appealed in every case, and we are fighting the cases on appeal, hoping to secure their release. But unfortunately, those appeals can take 6 months or more. So at this point, we're continuing to advocate for them. But our clients are so impacted by the investment that the county has made, and we are very grateful for your investment in the right to counsel for our community. I also have the privilege of highlighting some of the work of Evangeline has done for our community. Since joining in March of 2020 as the Archbishop Ireland Justice Fellow, through also support from Ramsey County, Evangeline has jumped right in and done tremendous work for us in a variety of areas. She's been able to be flexible to help us with removal defense work, naturalization cases, family petitions. She's kind of been the first one to volunteer to do Know Your Rights presentations on Facebook Live frequently, preparing written materials, kind of press information that we can release out about COVID-19 testing and treatment. And we've just so appreciated everything that you've allowed us to be able to do through Evangeline's work. And also included in the materials, I believe, is a 2-page summary of that work if you'd like to take a deeper dive. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Robin, and thank you, Courtney Lee. This is a good time to pause and take some questions before we move to our next area. I see Commissioner McDonough's hand is up, and give time for others to raise their hand. I have 2 quick questions, and I think it's kind of come up, but I think it's important to highlight is you've mentioned that these cases are at Fort Snelling. Are these clients being detained at Fort Snelling?
Thank you for that question. Yes, clients may be shortly detained at Fort Snelling to be processed in through their case, but ultimately we're seeing clients detained at county jail facilities. So for example, Freeborn County Jail in Albert Lea, Sherburne County Jail in Elk River, Candido High County Jail in Wilmer. And these detention conditions, although it's in hypothetically civil detention, it is held in the same conditions as individuals who are in criminal custody.
Thank you. I think that it also raises the concern about just how far away they are even removed from their families in Ramsey County when this detention happens, with no ability to visit and those kinds of things. So I think that's really important to hear. I'll turn it over to Commissioner McDonough.
Thanks, Chair Mattis Castile. This has been, I've been so fortunate to be a part of this process for quite a while now. And I've learned a lot and grown a lot too, as my understanding has grown. help me understand a little bit here, though, as I listen to you, Robin, and sharing these stories, it's kind of the impact we've been having. I understand the effect administration can have, right? Lots of executive orders from the president, the direction to Homeland Security and ICE about how aggressive interpretations about arresting and detaining people and the impact it has in community. And I know there's a lot of hope here as we move into a new administration and taking a look at some of those executive orders and taking a look at how aggressive in interpretations. I don't understand the court side of it. Is that impacted by administrative change, or once they get there, is that pretty much, it is what it is no matter what? I don't fully understand. Are these like federal judges that are there for life? Are they referees? Will an administration change with maybe a policy change or executive order change, will that have an impact on how these cases are ruled upon and determined once they get to court?
Thank you, Commissioner McDonough, for that question. And I would also invite others to jump in. I'll just kind of note a few things that it makes me think about, which I do think that there is a significant impact in court. When I started working on these cases in 2015, what we noticed was more prosecutorial discretion that was able to be offered from the Department of Homeland Security. If they found that someone would be a low prioritization for removal efforts or kind of limited resources, then they may agree to a certain disposition in a case, may stipulate to certain evidence, may kind of move the trial along more quickly, or kind of agree to negotiate. What we've seen is this sort of a stonewalling situation where the government, for example, won't agree to a continuance in any case of any sort. So we have the judges having to make decisions on continuance motions they normally wouldn't have to. The government is appealing in basically any case in which there is a criminal charge. So what that means is that before, where we may be able to have just one, of these 4 cases that were granted, the government may have said, we fought our case in court, and now the clients may be released, and we're not going to continue to file the appeal. So those clients may not be in detention if not for the administration's change in that way. In terms of the judges, we are not, unfortunately, Article 3 judges. And so the judges, a few that we have currently, have been appointed in this administration as well. So we have impacts there. In addition to that, I think, as I mentioned, the kind of the negotiation piece of it, the other piece of it really is detention, as Courtney pointed out. In the past, we might have had Immigration Customs Enforcement set a bond initially for a client. So when they're processing the client at Fort Snelling, they could determine, well, actually this criminal incident happened a long time ago, or this criminal incident has to do more so with homelessness or some other issue. It's not really that this person is a flight risk, or for example, this person is undocumented, but they have no arrest. So I don't need to keep them mandatory detention in custody. However, what we're seeing is by default, a determination by ICE that everyone is essentially detained without bond. What that requires then is that an attorney file a petition for bond with the immigration judge, or that an unrepresented person request that. Unfortunately, with the current administration, the burden is on the person in custody. So they need to prove to the government that they are not a danger to the community. And that can be very hard for someone who's unrepresented. And it kind of clogs up for the judges as well, because they're having to make individualized bond determinations on every case, where administratively it's possible to set bond and not have, or set up alternatives to detention that aren't even bond, that could say, you report to ICE once a year with the ankle monitoring or without. But unfortunately, we're not seeing that being exercised.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful.
Happy to add a little bit to that, Commissioner.
Sure, go ahead.
Please.
I think just, to supplement what Robin was saying about how immigration judges are not Article 3 judges. Immigration judges are administrative law judges. They're fancy lawyers who ultimately, their boss is the Attorney General, who's appointed by the president. And, the Department of Homeland Security is also an executive agency. So what we're seeing is that the judge, as well as the government attorney in the immigration civil proceedings, they're both within the executive branch. it's hard to argue that there is any semblance of fairness in a proceeding like that that's structured in that way. And so, under this current federal administration, which has taken over 400 different anti-immigrant actions, including executive enforcement, it's going to take a long, long time just to even start to undo some of those things, which has essentially impacted judges' abilities to rule, to terminate cases, continue cases, things that Robin already alluded to. It's also impacted the Department of Homeland Security's jurisdictions, purviews, policy priorities, things like that. But we know that the impacts of COVID, systemic racism, decades of attacks against immigrants, those things don't go away in a short amount of time. And so those things are going to outlast any sort of federal change or administration. And the impacts are felt on a local level. So what we are seeing on a national level is that the local commitments to these programs are going to be instrumental and urgent so long as the deportation and detention machinery exists. So thanks for continuing to invest in this program. We are hoping for a sustainable fund going forward. And, as Robin has shared, these programs have a meaningful difference in people's lives and in the community. So thanks again.
Yeah, go ahead.
Chair, if I could just, Courtney, I really appreciate, and Robin, it helps bring some clarity to the impact the administration has on the various parts here. But Courtney, I really appreciate your comments at the end there to really caution us that, an administration change is not a panacea here, that racism and the issues surrounding immigration have been with us, since the start of this country, and it's not going to change just because of an administration. There could be some, smoothing of the road in some areas or tempering of aggression and those types of things, but the impacts in our community are still going to be there. And I appreciate also recognizing that, there's 4 years of executive orders here. You just don't unwind them in, 10 days. But then I guess this last observation, and I know all of you who work in this every day know this, or at least thought of this, but I want to just say it out loud, especially for our Ramsey County staff, and taking a look at what it means for wraparound services, because in some ways, even though the last 4 years have been really tough, right? These last 2 months are really going to be anxious in the community because of the aggressiveness here of going out with a bang, no matter what, right? And so just the fear in our community for these next 2 months, even though January 20th was not going to be this huge change, getting through these next 2 months is going to be critical for so many people in our community. You mentioned 2 came up yesterday, right? And how aggressive are they going to get for the next 2 months? And how can we help support our community members, with our, with what we've already got in place?
Thank you,
Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner McDonough. Commissioner Reinhardt.
Thank you. This is, to be quite honest with you, this is better news than I expected. I just didn't know how successful it was going to be. And I know that, each and every one of these stories is heartbreaking. But the work that you're doing and the success that you are having is worth every penny and more. The impact on the community, on the families, on the relatives, on the friends, you can't measure that. You can't measure that in dollars and cents. So I just simply want to say how grateful I am for this work.
Thank you, Commissioner Reinhardt. Commissioner Carter.
Thank you. So I also just want to extend thanks to those who are on the call, our team members and our partners locally and nationally. We are very appreciative of all the support that has been provided. And I echo Commissioner Reinhardt in that the investment we have made does appear to be paying back many times in terms of the work that you are doing with those who need representation and with families who need wraparound services as they go through these trying trials in their lives. I wanted to just remark, first of all, that it's telling as you share the data and what can happen when individuals do have representation, and that in fact they show up for court. It's an alternative, in fact, that they have that representation. And we do want to get to a point where universal representation truly is universal. I have a question about that, given the success that you've had with the small investment that has been made. How far are we away from that? I just want a little bit of a reality here. Universal representation being a reality. And then I have another question about the national work as well. Could someone address, what's the hill that we would have to climb if it were actually universal?
Thank you.
In the sense of meaning for all, not just, for whatever circumstances.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Carter. I really appreciate the question. I think it's one that a lot of us sit with quite frequently. It's, really difficult to get phone calls from folks that we know are not in a priority area that we're able to represent. And I do think that the hill, unfortunately, is quite large in other areas in Minnesota. Right now, I think meeting with the court last week, that there are about 90 pending cases that are before the court right now. And that doesn't necessarily include people who are in long-term detention. We do have some individuals in our community who are able to afford a private attorney. The private attorney expenses are, thousands of dollars and often out of reach for a lot of folks. So I wouldn't be surprised if at least half of those individuals and maybe more need representation under a universal representation model. So I think that the hill is large. For Ramsey County, I think we had one individual who we needed to turn down due to a conflict, but we haven't had other individuals that we've had to turn away under this project, which has been tremendous. But I think in terms of thinking about, statewide representation for everyone who's in ICE custody in Minnesota, we're also looking at, unfortunately, individuals who are from the Dakotas because there isn't an immigration court out there. And so for individuals who have residents in the Dakotas, they may be transferred to Minnesota for their hearings as well. So it's a big endeavor, but it is a dream. And Courtney, I don't know if you can provide more.
And if I could just jump in addition to that group of folks from Minnesota, North and South Dakota, we do occasionally have, of course, arriving asylum seekers who are coming, depending on the flows. We'll have groups of people transferred up from the border or other people moved around. So unfortunately, having things tied to geography is complicated and does leave some people out.
Yeah. Thank you for that reality check. Given that there are so many who are in prisons and but for their mental health condition would not, and the fact that being in that circumstance in and of itself exacerbates those conditions and makes it even more difficult for them to plead their cases. It would seem that in addition to universal representation, and we found when they're there, it's tough to get them out, that prevention aspect and really working on decisions that can be made that aren't being made, whether by ICE or by judges, is really critical. And I just want to make sure that we in Ramsey County, as we are working through our legislative agendas, are able to connect with, those points of advocacy. And through our work and association with, for example, our national association, that we're able to work with you to understand the timing of the process, the unfolding of the work that may again begin to unfold for comprehensive immigration reform so that we can make certain we link all of the work that we're doing to that. So I would just ask that we stay abreast of that. You know, we're putting our federal legislative agenda together and asking the questions, what's the timing like? What's going to move? You know, what should we be advocating for and placing within our agendas at this time? So both from our staff and from the perspective of those who are working in the national space, let's just make sure that we connect those dots and can play the role that we need to play. Thank you very much. I guess that wasn't really a question. It's a request. Okay. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Carter. I'm going to let the county manager respond, and then I will go to Commissioner McGuire.
Thanks, Madam Chair. On the legislative part, yes, that makes good sense. Nothing to add there. I wanted to just, I want to go back to one thing Robin said in the previous response to Commissioner Carter, just to make sure I heard it right. These are important. As part of our work is trying to think of sustainability across the entire enterprise and how to serve. I mean, we have to make these weird choices all the time, and I don't want to chalk one up against another, but as we're trying to think of how to best holistically support families and build broader avenues of support and networks, these things matter. So if I heard you correctly, you said the funding that was able to be provided here through the total at $250,000 in this community has been able to serve all families who have presented to the door other than one who got conflicted out. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, so we had one case that we had to conflict out, and other than that, we have, as I mentioned, expanded representation to include other case types. And for those expanded areas of representation, we haven't been able to provide full universal representation on those. But in terms of the cases we initially prioritized when we wrote the proposal, we have met that need fully, and we have also accepted, I believe it's 5 or 6 cases under the expanded representation model, primarily focusing on habeas petitions.
Great. I appreciate that. It really does help to scope, and it actually kind of goes back to the initial part of Commissioner Carter's question, even while the statewide need is bigger. And then I'm just going to stay on mute because I want everyone else to keep talking, and it's great hearing from all of you, but great appreciation from all sides of the administration on down, and Elizabeth's been running point for our team, but this has been something that leadership across the county both believes in, but also knows that we can't do it without all of you doing the work for you do. So just my thanks now, and I'll go back to being quiet, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner McGuire.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And that's okay, County Manager. We don't need you to be quiet. That's all right. I really appreciate all of this work. It's so great to hear. I'm like Commissioner Reinhardt. I'm grateful that it's making a difference, that the amount that we were able to give at that time is actually helping. And so if you have anything more to add, and my question is in line with some that you've already been touching on. I was going to ask if there's a waiting list. Like, you've prioritized so many cases that you're drawing from. Are there just a lot more out there that you're not even able to look at because we just don't have the resources to do that? I mean, when I always say, when Head Start says they don't have a waiting list, I say, yeah, is that because people stopped applying? Yes, that's why there's no waiting list. Well, there is now, but there wasn't because people stopped asking. So I'm just curious, I just want to, like everyone else, well, how big is the hill? How much do we have really to go, and to, not have a false sense that, oh, we're doing it. We're handling this. I mean, we appreciate everything we're doing. But I just am going to say I agree with Commissioner McDonough. This panacea that with the new administration, suddenly all the rules will be different, and we'll have no one being deported, and ICE will be nice, and so that's just not going to happen that fast. The judges will still be there, unfortunately. I mean, the ones that are not helping. And so, I mean, I think we still do have so much work to do. But if you want to comment, and then I have one other question. So if you want to comment on anything I've just talked about.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner McGuire. It makes me think of kind of 2 different pots of folks. And one is for, as I mentioned, those who may not be active before the immigration court, but are in detention. And those are individuals who are, looking for long-term release. I would say that we're we are receiving more requests for that than we can respond to. And so we're prioritizing the ones that we can and trying to provide representation. We at this time aren't taking a wait list, but we are trying to track folks in general to know, okay, this person may be now able to file for this application based on how long they've been in detention. But resources wise, there are more individuals who need assistance, and they may be folks who have prior orders of deportation as well. But there's also another group of individuals who are those who were released from detention, but are still fighting their cases in a long backlog of cases. And those would be individuals not in detention. And I would say that, that need is tremendous, and we have not been able to come close to meeting that need either. So that's sort of the initial thoughts that I have relating to that. And I think that for us, we are still trying to provide as much pro se brief assistance as we can. So if someone calls us and we're not able to take on their case for full representation, we do try to send them some materials to refer them. The problem is that all of the legal service providers under this partnership have limited resources. And so that becomes a problem, because there are oftentimes folks who may contact us and we're not able to provide if we're not under this prioritization. But with this project, we have been able to represent the folks that we prioritized initially and some additional individuals. But I think the main gap there is for those additional case types that I mentioned, as well as the large non-detained cases that have been postponed during the whole pandemic. But the case sizes, and we can share that information if it's requested, have really ballooned under this administration. So there are so many, hundreds of thousands of pending cases nationally. And that's another concern for Ramsey County residents.
Oh, I'm sorry I asked. No, I'm not sorry. No, I'm not sorry I asked. No, I mean, this is daunting, obviously. Yeah, we get these little rays of hope, like, oh, good. But you're right. I mean, it's just a huge issue. But it doesn't mean we can't keep working. We got to do everything we can. Everything helps. So I'm happy about that. I don't know if there was. I want to question.
Did you have one? Yeah, go on to one more question. Then we're going to move on to the second half.
Just and if we're going to get to this, and I don't know when I would ask this question, but when we first started doing this, we had said we don't want to detain anyone in our jails. We don't want to be that place that. Sorry about that. We don't want to be that place that detains. And so then that is a really loud phone. I'm sorry, it's my home phone and I can't turn it off. Wait, maybe I can. Sorry. There, okay. So we said we don't want to detain people in our jails, so we don't want to be that place. And so then they send them, out to, the rural areas. So I know we've thought about this dilemma that we have. So do you have any comments on that dilemma? I've talked to actually Representative McCollum about this, Congresswoman McCollum, and she says, I'm with you, but I hate if we close all of our jails in the metro, then they're way out where the family can't visit them. So I'm just curious what you think about that. Either of you.
We might be putting them too much on the spot.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Yeah,
no, that's okay.
If you have a comment,
Right,
yeah, thanks.
Michelle, did you want to say something? It's a tough one.
Yes, it is a tough one, Commissioner McGuire. I think this is where the county's full scope of action and influence is really important. That part of the function of our detention apparatus nationally is that it is a national infrastructure. It encompasses hundreds of facilities. And under a very broad immigration law that allows detention of anyone the government believes is an alien in violation of their status. So it provides wide latitude that won't change under the next administration. The budget supporting the number of people in detention has gone from an average daily population of INS detention back in the 1980s of 54 people per day to over 50,000 people per day nationwide. They're paying for that. Mm-hmm. And to the extent that the county can support an agenda to reduce that federal expenditure, there is no limit under the statute for who can be detained the only limits we had for years was the dollars invested. We need limits. We need statutory limits. We need to move away from a detention first presumption. We need to narrow the authority, but we also need to pull the plug on the fire hose of spending. And keep in mind that the agency that's ICE detention, that's not counting border detention. That's a different agency. That's Customs and Border Protection. So we're talking about vast numbers of people. That's a lot of money. I agree that it's a difficult task for a county to say, are we going to be the one that says no? When our neighbors to the south are, entering into mutual service agreements so that Steele County houses Freeborn County detainees to make sure that the money keeps coming into Freeborn County. Those are choices that governments are making. You play a very influential role. I've seen Commissioners McDonough and Ortega at work with your fellow county commissioners working magic and influence. Please use that influence locally, but also nationally.
Absolutely. It seems like we should get something on the AMC and NACO platform. Do we think there is anything like that? I don't know. Do you know if there's anything on our state association or a national association? I'm not even sure we could get it. I mean, I don't even know if we could get it there, but it was definitely, we could look at it and see if we could get it there.
Commissioner McDonough, do you want to respond to that quickly?
I'm not aware of anything on the state platform. At NACO, there is an immigration task force that meets regularly to talk about immigration issues.
And on that point, there is ongoing immigration position inside the NACO platform, but it has shrunk over the years as it's been so difficult over the past 4 years to almost non-existent. And that's what I think we do need to pay attention to. What is the right timing for building that out? What is likely to be able to move within the short period? And as we do this work together to stay abreast of that and carry that forward, no doubt there will be others who are on the task force who are bringing that forward, but being able also to support it with our platform. Makes sense.
Great. Elizabeth, I think you wanted to respond as well.
Yeah, I can respond, and I could also help transition to our next phase as well. So on the questions about our platforms, Chair Carter, this was based on our workshop from last week in our state legislative platform and your request for us to see a robust immigration list of priorities. And so we actually worked with our legal service providers to help list a list of key issues. And so that will be included and updated within our platform as well. And then to the question about jails posed by Commissioner McGuire, I just want to express the value of working with our legal service providers in this space. They're the ones who are actually driving an hour, 45 minutes or an hour and a half away, and they are meeting and doing client intake with our detained residents, and they are tracking and letting us know where they live and our residents in Ramsey County. And my understanding that historically Ramsey County at one time used to house detention for ICE, but it's my understanding that we chose not to do that on the policy of we did not want to make a profit or collect revenue from federal agencies because of that. With that said, there was an impact on families, being able to visit, being able to see them. And I would also add, and this goes back to the days where I used to practice this world, is you also have to bring interpreters as well. Like, these are not things that are appointed or given for free. And so that's why I think the value of our service providers is so key and really important. And I think Robin did a great job of representing all three of our service providers. I do want to acknowledge Michelle and Robin Phillips, who are here with Advocates for Human Rights, and also Ann Carlson, who was with Minnesota Legal Aid. While we didn't give them an opportunity to speak or share their stories, I just want to share the value of these three collaboratives working together to serve all of our clients in various forms of relief that we are able to provide them.
Great.
And so with that, Madam Chair, can I go to the next
please.
Transition? So Lydia, if we can pull up the PowerPoint, and we're going to have our staff talk about our wraparound services. And as Robin articulated well with her client story, legal representation is just one of a myriad of things: housing support, financial support, the wraparound services, the things that we provide as critical county services on an everyday basis is really critical to this holistic approach in serving our residents. And with that, I'll hand it over to Sarah Hawley.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Commissioners, County Manager O'Connor. It's really a pleasure to be here today presenting on behalf of the Immigration Wraparound Services team and the program that, of course, you established through board approval in 2018. This investment in immigrant and refugee communities speaks to, I think, what has been mentioned before in this presentation this afternoon, really leaning into supporting community stability, advancing racial equity and community engagement with our refugee and immigrant communities in Ramsey County. As you all know, in summer of 2019, the county created this amazing, I have to say amazing, cross-department and cross-service team of individuals to help lead and support the Immigration Wraparound Services program. I want to lean into the fact that this was really a collaboration here at the county between policy and planning, the health and wellness service team, which included the public health department, health and wellness administration. We all came together to launch this program through shared decision-making, knowledge, varying skills and talent, with really one goal in mind, to support individuals and families going through immigration proceedings. And so at the very start of this program, we paused. And that pause led to intentionality around engaging with immigrant and refugee communities, sharing power, and embedding our values of advancing racial equity at the start of this program. We did this, Madam Chair, Commissioners, and County Manager O'Connor, by engaging our refugee and immigrant communities that are most impacted, agencies, partners, and organizations, to really identify the service needs, the focus areas we ended up funding, and what we should prioritize as we began to develop the funding process. We hosted a listening session with community in October of 2019 to really learn more about what community needed, what they saw as most important, and what was working. We also leaned into the challenges that communities were facing and really had a very frank conversation with the community that evening at the Hamlin Library, and how we could leverage this opportunity to help fill some of the gaps and needs of our immigrant and refugee families and individuals that were going through immigration proceedings. As we were learning from community, the team began the process of thinking about and thinking through how we could reduce the barriers to communities accessing this funding. And so with that, we worked with finance, policy and planning, legal departments, procurement, health and wellness service team, and our team to really determine the best path forward. As a result of that, it was determined that the best path forward, as you can see on your screen, was to pilot a grant process for this program, which I'm really, really proud of. I'm really proud of this collaboration, not only with community, but internally, to really forge that path forward together. So some of the steps that we followed were really sharing the opportunity with community, listening to community, and making sure that we were pivoting during that time and what community really needed. We took time to evaluate proposals with community representation. We took time to develop and execute grant agreements and really start that process at the county to think about the grant process and utilizing the Immigration Wraparound Services as the first pilot to do that. We continue during this process, which I'm really proud of, is that we continue to follow up with the partners that have been funded through this process during our grant reporting, debriefing with community, and really assessing the progress as we go, which I think is so important as we have moved into our COVID-19 response, but even before then, making sure that our program for immigration wraparound really reflected the needs of community. And then, as I mentioned, debriefing with our partners continues to be so important. And I think because we embedded that at the beginning, we've just built on that. And so we're building on the lessons learned, the ways that we want to improve this program as we pivot into 2021. And so during this time, we have distributed $100,000 both in 2019 and in 2020 as we wrap up this year to really partner with local and community-based organizations working with and on behalf of immigrant and refugee communities that are going through immigration proceedings. Next slide, please. So next, I want to briefly talk about the 3 grant cycles that we have implemented as a part of the Immigration Wraparound Program that are, like I mentioned, reaching and serving our refugee and immigrant communities here in Ramsey County. Those communities include our Asian and Pacific Islander communities, our Latino and Latinx communities, and our African-born communities here in Ramsey County. In 2019, we had our first round of funding where we had 10 grantees. In 2020, we've had 2 cycles of funding, so we're calling round 2. We had 5 grantees, and then as we kind of wrap up this year, we're into round 3 of the funding, where we have 8 grantees. And so to date, we have had a total of 23 grant agreements that were fully executed with local organizations and community partners, supporting a total of 17 local organizations and partners. And I just want to mention and note that on this slide, we've had organizations that have received multiple grants under this funding opportunity. So that's why you're seeing the 17 versus the 23 grant agreements. And I believe that you have a list of the funded organizations in your supplementary information packet. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Lydia Germa.
Thank you. So as Sarah had described, the services and issue areas we work with our community partners to address were directly informed by community. And the goal of these services was essentially to supplement and complement the immigration legal defense provision. And so we were really intentional about making sure that we were engaging with community before every grant cycle to ensure that we were partnering with community organizations to provide services that community said it actually needed, right? So it's providing those services to not only the individuals that are going through removal proceedings, but also their families as well. And as we continue to engage with our partners, we also found that there's a huge existing need within the overall immigrant and refugee community for the key services that are listed on the slide. So some of those services include, education and awareness regarding deportation proceedings, immigration law 101. Immigration law is very, very complex, and very few people have a good understanding of what it is and what it entails, as well as pathways to citizenship through trainings, legal clinics, and consultations. We also found a great need for increased access and referrals to free legal services and ensuring residents are connected to existing Ramsey County services, particularly in the areas of financial assistance and social services. Having these short-term and multiple grant cycles also allowed us to be flexible. It allowed us to be flexible in responding to emerging immigration issues, which included community confusion and concern regarding the impact of the public charge rule on their ability to adjust their immigration status or access county services, concern about targeted deportation of particular immigrant communities in our county, renewing existing immigration statuses, including the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, and the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbating the need for housing, school, and food access support. As we worked with our partners, after every grant cycle, we really wanted to make sure that we were connecting back with these grantee organizations so that they can share their experiences and reflections with us. And we wanted to share a couple with you here, or a few with you, that speak to how they were able to use the community grant, the immigration grants, or the wraparound services grants to serve the community. So the first one I have here is from ANDI, and it's a local nonprofit that provides a variety of youth, adult, and health and wellness programming for the African immigrant community. They wrote, ANDI completed the Navigating the Legal System workshop, which was a 2-part series held on October 24th and 31st of 2020. We received a lot of positive feedback about the 2 workshops. Participants found it informative and were engaged. One participant said, "Can this workshop be conducted every week? This implies that immigrant questions are many and there's a need for continued education." The second reflection I'll share is from Clues, which is an organization that provides culturally and linguistically relevant social services to the Latinx community in the Twin Cities. And they were able to provide resources and services to those impacted by the public charge rule and the deferred action for childhood arrivals. So they launched a COVID-19 hotline and connected over 4,500 community members with internal and external resources, such as CLUES and government cash assistance programs, free food access, one-on-one youth partnership or mentorship, employment trainings, and other services as well. And the final reflection I'll share is from Release Minnesota 8. And this is an organization that serves the Southeast Asian immigrant community impacted by detention and deportation through community organizing and advocacy. They wrote, "We are thankful for the support of Ramsey County. Before the pandemic, these grants helped us to hold 2 in-person events that had over 400 plus participants, which included impacted individuals. During one of the events, we were able to help over 100 people with final orders of removal and submitting their FOIA request to EOIR. Having all of these documents is crucial when working with an attorney. The Ramsey County funds allowed Release Minnesota 8 to support those with deportation orders to do that." So these and other feedback that we receive from our partners and those that they serve really reaffirm to us the importance of the supports we're providing community through our wraparound services. And though these wraparound services are not focused on a single family, and they're not the traditional way that we think about wraparound services, we were really intentional about going before community, like Sarah said, to determine what the actual needs in the community were before we assumed what they were and started recreating programs and services and supports that already existed within the community and also within the county as well. Thank you. And now I'll pass it off to, this is the end of our section, and Edmundo is going to talk about updates from the Office of the City Attorney at the City of St. Paul.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, hold on one second. Before you move on, I do see a hand up from Commissioner Carter, and so I just want to make sure her question gets answered. Commissioner Carter.
Thank you. I will ask it briefly, and you all can decide the time, the best time for responding. We heard about the work that's being done in universal representation now in the wraparound services. And I just have to share that I was so thankful to have participated with Vera in a forum and as a panelist, although I think I learned far more than I contributed, that in addition to talking about the value of universal representation, also connected the movement for Black Lives Matter to the immigrant rights movement, considering the issues of criminalization and the intersectionality between being an immigrant and being darker skinned. All of that is said because I want to mark that this is great beginning work for us, and that as we implement it and move it forward, I would ask a question about how we're working to understand to what extent the representation and the wraparound services are engaging and reflecting the populations impacted. We saw some demographics around the universal representation. I wonder if we have demographics around the work we've been doing in wraparound and how we are comparing to our population and understanding whether in fact we have good representation as we're moving forward in that regard. So I'll ask that question and ask that our staff and partners respond in whatever ways are possible.
Does anyone want to respond, or should we wait until the next section? Yeah, let's go on to the next section and we'll take answers and questions at the end. Thanks. All right, Edmundo, we're back to you. Maybe.
Oh, you're on mute.
The slogan of 2020.
Sorry about that. All right. I just wanted to say, Madam Chair, Commissioners, Manager O'Connor, thank you for this opportunity to address the county commissioners and to tell you a little bit about what's going on at the City of St. Paul. I am with the City Attorney's Office. I'm an assistant city attorney. I was hired in June of 2019 and to fill a role as the immigration resource for the City of St. Paul. My position provides legal advice on all immigration-related matters to the mayor, city council, and to the city prosecutors. My role is similar to the role created by Ramsey County Attorney John Choi when he hired Jorge Saavedra to be a resource within the county attorney's office for the prosecutors to have someone who could provide guidance on immigration law so that prosecutors had the opportunity to possibly avoid the negative immigration consequences associated with criminal convictions. So my role also has an aspect of it where I work with our city attorneys who are prosecuting domestic violence, DWIs, while they're not felony level or serious offenses as the Ramsey County Attorney's Office handles. They do create negative immigration consequences, which result in people being detained and removed from the United States. The other aspect of my job was to develop and manage the city's immigrant refugee program. And the purpose of that program was to pursue initiatives that facilitate the successful integration of immigrants and refugees into St. Paul's civic, economic, and cultural life. Our joint program with Vera to provide legal defense really is an effort to make people in our community feel safe and have the ability to combat removal proceedings, which are very scary, very disruptive to families. So partnering with Ramsey County and Vera, it fills the mission of the program that we're trying to develop. Next slide, Lydia. Can we go to the next slide? But part of that initiative is also creating a citizenship initiative for the city of St. Paul. One of the ways that we defend against removal is to provide legal representation for those individuals that are detained. Another aspect is really if someone is a citizen, they can't be removed from the United States. So really, if you look at removal as kind of like an illness, providing an attorney to defend people is like providing a doctor to treat the illness. Citizenship is like an immunization. It prevents the illness from occurring. We are looking to develop some initiatives around citizenship to promote citizenship. COVID-19 put those initiatives on hold for a little bit. But the benefit, is really important because I'd like to go back to the example that Robin raised of the Corinne individual who was in removal proceedings and because of homelessness and some crimes associated around poverty. If you look at that individual, she stated that he entered the United States when he was 13 years old, that his mom and other family members were here as permanent residents. Now, if his mom had naturalized before he turned 18, he would have acquired citizenship. And really the benefit of promoting citizenship in this context is that the children of our immigrants would be protected. And if you look at a lot of the communities in St. Paul where people are running into issues with removal, many of those individuals came here with their parents as young children and their parents didn't naturalize. And if they had, we would have prevented a lot of them from ending up in removal proceedings. So that's one of the reasons we're pursuing a citizenship initiative. We have found that there are two barriers to citizenship. One is the ability to read, speak, and understand English. So that's something we'll be working on in the future through our libraries. But the other big barrier is the inability to pay the naturalization filing fees. Those fees are currently over $700. The current administration had wanted to raise those fees to almost $1,200. Luckily, a federal court issued an injunction preventing those fee increases from going forward, but they still could go forward once this federal case is resolved. Then people are looking at almost $1,200 to file for citizenship. That is a big barrier because you have to come up with that money up front. So one of the initiatives we were looking at is trying to raise some money to create a loan loss reserve fund to then work with a financial partner to create low interest loans that were also Sharia law compliant, so that our immigrant refugee communities could then borrow the money at a low or no interest rate to be able then to naturalize. So that's something that's in the works, but again, because of the pandemic and some of us, the city having to shift our priorities, that program has been placed on hold. I'm hopeful that we can get something going in the next couple months, but we'll have to see. I'd also really like to thank Lydia and Elizabeth for their great work, because they've been fantastic partners, and we've been able to really engage with our community and really do some strategic advocacy. We were able to, advocate for the detained during the pandemic, asking that DHS, we sent letters asking DHS to release individuals detained by ICE. Those efforts also resulted in an op-ed in the Star Tribune. Just great work. They've been great partners. I can't say enough about how helpful they've been to me in my work and on this project. Also, the wraparound services have been so helpful and beneficial. Lydia put together a seminar for providers in the area on public charge, and I have to tell you, I talked to several of my colleagues in the Twin Cities outside of St. Paul, and to the one, they all said that was the best seminar on public charge that they had ever attended. So I think, I can't say enough about the work that Lydia and Elizabeth have been doing on this project. And I feel very fortunate to have them as partners and going forward on this effort. Some of the other things that we're doing in the city, we are involved in an activity known as Welcoming Week that's sponsored by an organization called Welcoming America. Welcoming Week is a week to celebrate immigrant inclusion in communities and by putting on events and promoting welcoming and having, welcoming communities also engage with arriving communities so that we can start to work together to make arriving communities feel safe and welcome. We planned on doing a lot of activities this past Welcoming Week, which was held from September 11th to September 20th, but because of the pandemic, we had to cancel 90% of it. We were able to put forward a seminar on the benefits of naturalization to communities. There are so many benefits to not only the individual, because the individual gets to participate civically, they get to vote, they get to run for public office, they get to do all kinds of things that they wouldn't be able to do if they weren't citizen. Studies have shown that their incomes rise, they're twice as likely to be homeowners, benefits to the communities they live in, they're paying more taxes, they're participating in local government. So there's just tremendous upside to naturalization, and we tried to promote that during our Welcoming Week activities. So I think in the future we'll try to do more, but for the moment we are really grateful for Ramsey County's partnership in this program, and we look forward to working together and keeping this program going. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edmundo. Commissioner Carter, is your hand up still from before, or do you have a new question?
Didn't take it down. Thank you.
Okay.
Will do.
Thanks. I'm going to turn it back over to Elizabeth, and then we'll get to questions at the end. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll be brief because I think Edmundo already hit on a lot of these things, but it really gets back to Commissioner McDonough's question about the impact of the current administration. And I just want to highlight some key policies that we've had to scramble in this past year alone, just under this current administration. The public charge rule, as Amudo mentioned, we invited lawyers from Mid-Minnesota Legal as well as Merles to provide education and training to our county staff and our partners 3 times in the past 2 years, given the evolving changes in that policy alone. Our last training had 136 attendees via Zoom. And as Amudo said, just great feedback about the value and importance of this. And even seasoned attorneys learn new things in that session as well. Refugee resettlement. I don't know if the board recalls, but back in December of 2019, we actually had to vote on unanimously supporting and authorizing the county manager to submit a written letter of consent to the Department of State to continue the initial resettlement of refugees in Ramsey County. And we had folks from our community speak on that as well. Also ICE detention during COVID, we touched on this as well. Ramsey County St. Paul wrote a joint Star Tribune op-ed. This was a very courageous op-ed in my opinion, with support from Vera calling on ICE to release immigrants in detention amid COVID. The county also wrote a letter to ICE officials in April requesting the release of immigrants in Minnesota ICE detention who do not pose a threat to public safety and to prevent the spread of COVID in these highly dense facilities. Huge leadership from Ramsey County in taking a county-wide, or a region-wide and statewide approach in this space. I would also note that our public health director in her individual capacity also wrote an expert letter in support of releasing detainees as a result of COVID as well for the University of Minnesota Law School to support federal litigation. I also want to highlight, and this is really important for our staff, a lot of our staff are immigrants and refugees and come from that as well. And back when COVID broke out, there was a lot of hate crimes, discrimination, and hostility against Asian Americans within our community. And so we did a Ramsey County article and took a stance in solidarity with our Asian American community and the Asians and refugees as well, that we do not support the discrimination that was happening in our community. We continue to strengthen our partnerships. We continue to work with Hennepin County, Minneapolis State, and the DEED. There's a new Commissioner of Immigrant Services out at DEED, and Lydia and I have been trying to meet with that commissioner. A few cancellations the past few months here, but taking that stance. And as Edmundo and Commissioner Carter mentioned, she, Edmundo, and Lydia have had the opportunity to serve on immigration panels for Vera at national conferences and meetings, and gathering both the county and the city's presence in this work. Yeah, final slide, please. And so just to talk about next steps, I think that we've all learned that continued partnership of everyone involved in this call in our community is important as well. We want to continue our wraparound services, our community engagement. We will release in the next round of funding. Sustainability, financial sustainability. You heard from Courtney that our contract ends in February of next year. And while the majority or over half have expended, there's a huge question of how we sustain the legal defense part long-term. So that will definitely be a conversation that we have with leadership and the county board. And as mentioned, we have the shared legislative policies and platforms. And again, this comes from Chair Carter's request from our board workshop from last week. And just to give you a highlight of that, things like driver's license are important things. 1 day matters for gross misdemeanor convictions and decreasing that by 1 day, because we know that that 365-day mark often instigates folks to removal proceedings, eliminating 2-year deadline for post convictions, and creating uniformity for non-citizen survivors of violence. So again, we're taking a more robust and intentional approach in our state legislative platform. And with that, I'll conclude the presentation and head back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. We do have a few questions, and we'll thank you, Lydia, so we can see each other again and we're not just stuck on a home screen. But I just want to thank all the presenters. I know this was super in-depth and really important, and I'm going to just ask one question, and it's kind of in the way of, how do we prevent people coming into this system to begin with? While we were on this call, I received an email from a community member who has been actively working to engage and organize Corinne and Carini youth, and there has been rising concern of these young folks who are in not citizens, but are in different statuses, but because of poverty, because of lack of services, because of isolation, they're joining gangs, they're getting involved in some criminal activity, and they're feeling like there's not enough attention being taken care of these newly arriving immigrants, and especially as they're coming into their own as teenagers. And so as we're thinking about that, does that fall into our wraparound services? Is that a completely different program? I just kind of want to put it out there so we can prevent them from needing your services and really address that issue. I don't know if anyone wants to respond.
Let me take a shot. I'll take a holistic shot at that a little bit. I think there's a couple of places where I think that work matters. I do think the immigration services matter, but they're not upstream, right? They matter to families, which may prevent a sibling from taking on the same fate, but the way in is not the way in that you're asking about in that question. I think our work around transforming systems together, I think that's one table where community has a voice at that table to lift this up and potentially be one of the areas we work in. And in our fundamental work around justice system reform about both front end and what happens on the back end, this gets to why that work is so important. And it gets to why the partnerships with the bench and the county attorney and the county sheriff and the community and the city, we have to continue that work. And so in the transforming systems together director position, by the way, that process is moving ahead and we're in the middle of interview process rounds, and had a chance to connect to the group as the next round is about to happen soon that I'll be a part of. And as that role comes into this office, it allows us to bring a lot of our work together under a shared umbrella where that reform effort is going to take place together. And I think it really keeps it close then to policy and planning and many of the folks you talked to today. And so it's not a perfect answer and a specific one in every way, but hopefully it gives you a sense of how we're trying to both structurally, financially, and systematically get at addressing the work.
Thanks for that. I'll go to Commissioner McDonough.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Good work, everybody. And even though the hill is big, and Commissioner Carter's words, and we've got a lot of work to do, I'm really encouraged, whether it's the wraparound services we're doing, the results we're getting with the Defense Fund, the partnership we have with the City of St. Paul and community partners. I just appreciate that so much. I do want to take a moment though and call this out, and might have a little bit of connection to Trista's question and the concern, but because it's complex. We all get that, and there's so many pieces. But Edmundo, you talked a little bit about the collateral consequences, the work the city attorney's office is doing, and the work that the county attorney's office is doing on the felony level. And that's so important, and that's a thing that we can do, right, without adding a ton of money. I mean, the county attorney brought in an attorney to make sure and look at it, and we're thankful for that. But it also takes a lot of courage to be able to move forward. A number of us had to stand tall with John Choi when he got pushback from the law enforcement community, when he did utilize collateral consequences. And it's always baffled me. In so many ways, we expect so much more from our immigrants and refugees than we expect from our own people, right? The lack of the ability to forgive, second chances, the ability to understand seems to disappear when immigrant or refugee is connected with an individual. And collateral consequences are so important in so many different ways, but especially in our refugee community, because that can be the trigger, right? They could be good all the way up until that moment in time. And then it triggers something that, really changes their life forever. And we all know the structural racism in our system about arresting, charging, prosecuting, convicting already falls heavily on people of color. And when we're talking about immigrants and refugees right now, we're talking really all about people of color, because we're not having immigrant and refugee issues from Western Europe anymore. And so I just want to acknowledge the St. Paul City Attorney's Office and their work in collateral consequences, and call out the work that John Choi is doing, and for us as a county board to continue to support that work, and be loud and stand tall on that work. And again, thanks to all the partners here. like Victoria, I'm encouraged, but then I'm also energized, and I even feel more challenged to do better myself here in my role to be able to help have an impact for people that live in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner McDonough. I don't see any other hands up at this time. I think everyone is eternally grateful for all the work that you are all doing. And I hope that as partners and service providers and the staff, that you feel the support from the county board on this issue. We all believe it's really important. Elizabeth, did you want to close or have any final thoughts before we end today, or anyone else that presented?
Madam Chair, I'll just give one
Yes.
final thought before going to Elizabeth. It goes to your funding question you brought up at the beginning. I think it's just, I want to kind of close on that and not leave it out there.
Sure.
You know, the $100,000 in wraparound services was built into the base when the county board took an action there. I think that was an important step to align those immigration support services directly with what I'll call like the bread and butter work that the county does anyway. That's an easy, logical connect. The legal wraparound work is a slightly new area of work, so it was a tougher type of thing to figure out how and where, and that money was not the sustainability piece. That's the big piece as we go into this next budget cycle and the conversations we're going to be having, and Elizabeth's thinking right now about how things prioritize and where they fit. I think the other piece to that is the other $150,000 in that chunk to make a total of $250,000. And so I think, you know, there's no, for everybody on here, just to hear the part of the wraparound services work is slated to continue, and there's no reason that's going to change. It's now figuring out the legal representation piece. It's continuing to build that tent and grow on all the work that Commissioner McDonough just referenced and everybody else has talked about as we've gone today. And the timing of this is good. We wanted to do it before we began the next budget planning cycle, which will kick off right after the holiday season.
Great, thank you for that. Elizabeth, back to you.
Really just, I'm glad Ryan brought that up, as well as our commitment in being intentional, strategic, in doing this, knowing with our budget constraints as well. But I'm optimistic that we'll find us a solution to sustain the partnership and our work with community. Really the big themes is the holistic approach, not a one size fits all. You know, I am very personally passionate about this. Many of you guys know this is part of my former life, and sometimes you have to separate your passion from this because you can get so caught up on everything. Everybody in this call, Sarah mentioned it, this cross collaborative team is very unique, I think, in my perspective from the county to come together around this effort. Leading with race and advancing race equity, our strategic priorities has driven our funding and our resources and our priorities in the space. I really want to thank the presenters today. We practiced on Friday when I had like 2 hours of sleep after being in labor relations all day. And so I apologize for the rough transitions. Courtney, who joined us from New York, and Vera and their true partnership in this. I know that when you guys approach Hennepin County, I'm a competitive person and I want to share that we got to it first, which I'm glad we did. So just, it's truly been a great partnership and really community and the staff. I really have to uplift and commend all the staff who are here today. We couldn't do it without you. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Elizabeth. Before we close, I see Commissioner Carter has her hand up, and I think I see Commissioner McDonough wanting to make a final comment. So go ahead, Commissioner Carter.
Thank you. So I had asked a question during the process before we moved to the next section and really just laid it there, appreciating all of the great work that is going on here and the foundation that we can build on, and also optimistic that we will find a way to continue this partnership. I just wanted to, by way of acknowledging all the answers aren't here, just request some follow-up as we move forward and the work progresses in understanding how, in fact, communities are represented within this work. Is a challenge for us, you know, although we do know that we're talking purely about people of color at this time in this immigration space. It is a challenge for us also to look at the intersectionality even within this population. And so I would like us to be able to hear back on that at a later point in time. And I thank you all so much for the information you brought forward today. Looking forward to the ongoing work.
Thanks. I see Sarah Holly raising her hand, maybe with an answer.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioner Carter. So just to answer part of your question, for the immigration wraparound services side of things, we did look for organizations that represented a variety of cultural communities. So we're really proud about that even at the listening session in October of 2019, our crowd was so diverse, and we continue to build on that listserv and connection to community as we pivot each time we have a round of funding. And so I would say that we're pretty diverse in the organizations that we are currently working with. I also want to note that we can definitely follow up to your question around, specific cultural communities, language, and just kind of just follow up as we continue to receive our progress reports from our community partners. I think it's very important that we lift up the work that they're doing, as Lydia has mentioned earlier, and also the communities that they're reaching. But I just wanted to respond to your question directly.
Thank you, Sarah. Commissioner McDonough, are you going to make a comment? No, okay. Then we are wrapped up. We wanted to say thank you again for everyone for your great work, and we'll continue this